We will now begin KGFP 2021 session 6-1 organized by KINU. The title of this session is Evaluation of 10 Years of the Kim Jong Un Regime, Economy and Society. We have invited 2 presenters, 3 discussants, and the session will be moderated by Professor Kim Jong-Un. We have 2 discussants who have joined us virtually. Now the floor is yours, Professor Kim. Hello everyone, my name is Kim Jong-un. The title of the session, 6-1, is Evaluation of 10 Years of the Kim Jong Un Regime, Economy and Society. Right before this session, there was an analysis of diplomacy and politics. And over the past decade, despite difficulties, Kim Jong-un pursued his goal of elitism and populism. Despite the difficulties for his people, and that was evaluation of the politics and diplomacy of the Kim Jong Un regime. And the economy and society are closely related to politics and diplomacy. So once we analyze the economy and society, I believe that we will be able to draw a larger picture of the Kim Jong Un regime. When Kim Jong Un first seized power, no one expected that Kim Jong Un would be in power this stable for the past 10 years. However, the regime suffers from the economic sanctions, COVID-19, as well as natural disasters. It faces triple threats. So amidst such challenges, how has the economy and society been developed over the past decade, and what will be the path forward? This session is organized by KINU, so we have 2 presenters from KINU. First, we have a director, Hong Jae-han, who studied economics in SMU, and he studies North Korea economy, economic cooperation between the 2 Koreas, and projects for economic growth. He studied and wrote about the status of North Korean businesses and ideas for cooperation to improve the lives of the North Korean residents, and so on. We have 2 presenters, and then the presentations will be followed by 3 discussions. The second presenter is Dr. Jung Eun-mi, and Dr. Jung is a specialist in society. She received her PhD in SMU, and she was a research fellow in the Reunification Center at SMU with me, and she currently serves as a research fellow at KINU. And I forgot to mention that Dr. Hong is director at KINU, and he also serves as an advisor to reunification between the 2 Koreas. And Dr. Jung studies reunification and the economy of North Korea, and talks about the path as well as changes in North Korea's economy and how the policies can improve the lives of the people, and also conducted annual research on the social changes in North Korea. First, we will hear from the presenters, and once we move on to the discussion session, I will present the discussants as well. So you will have about 15 minutes each, and then 7-8 minutes for the discussion.
Hello everyone, I am Jae-won Hong from KINU. Today I'm going to be presenting on assessing 10 years of the Kim Jong Un regime, foreign sector of the North Korean economy. So it is part of the research that I am doing on assessing tenures of the Kim Jong Un regime as a whole. First, on the background, it's been 10 years since the beginning of the Kim Jong Un regime. And assuming that the Kim Jong Un regime will continue on, I believe it is time that we review the characteristics of the regime's economic management, and in particular, how the economy is faring amidst the sanctions. And trade was an important area to analyze North Korea's economy because we can collect relatively more data, and the data is more credible compared to other areas. And the imports and exports of the North Korean economy is a way to analyze how it is doing and its current status. So in the study, I try to look at the import and export statistics during the Kim Jong-un regime, in particular since the strengthening of sanctions, in order to analyze North Korea's economy. Introduction to the data. North Korea does not announce trade data officially, so we have to utilize trade data from partnering countries. So what has been exported to North Korea should be stated as North Korean import, and vice versa. So we do an analysis of import and export of North Korea through such statistics, which is called mirror statistics. Of course, there are some limitations to utilizing mirror statistics. The first thing is that there are frequent cases in the past where the trading partner confused South Korea with North Korea and put in North Korea as a trading partner instead of South Korea, for example. But since the 2010s, this issue has been reduced. However, when you go into the details of the data analysis, there are some areas that might have misinterpretation and distortions. Still, such data can be used, and when I try to look at the overall data, I looked at KOTRA's data, but for detailed analysis, there might be some issues due to confusion between South Korea and North Korea. So in such cases, I use the data of North Korea and China trade. That is because compared to the other countries' data, China and North Korea trade data is more reliable, and China comprises a very large portion of North Korea's trade. So just by looking at this, we can get a sense of the trends. First, overview of trends in trade. I think we can identify three main trends. First, during the Kim Jong-un era, trade has increased. So there has been an increase in the size of imports and exports. Compared to the 2000s, exports had increased by 73% and imports by 42.9%. Second, we are seeing a continuous trade deficit in their structure. It was the same in the 2000s, but for 10 years, there has been $12 billion that have been recorded as trade deficit. And the third trend is that there is a high dependency on China for trade. As you can see from the graphs, it shows the portion of trade with China, and it is around 80%, and sometimes it is even 90%. So you can see that trade with China takes the lion's share. Now going into the details, I will look at exports and imports. But I will focus more on imports. Let's take a look at exports first. A major characteristic is as shown in the table. Primary exports is a big portion, and that is because that is one of the main characteristics of an underdeveloped country. And second, since 2017, manufacturing is increasing in its portion. And in 2019, it went up to 80%. So, this is not because of improvements in their manufacturing capability, but there were sanctions, and this may have led to these changes. Other than that, the primary products and processed products, in the beginning of the 2010s, there was rapid increase. And that is what can be identified as trends or characteristics of exports in the Kim Jong Un era. And I think what is more important is manufacturing. So it would be important for us to look at manufacturing first. I analyze iStance. This is from the Ministry of Trade and Industry, and this is an analysis system. So just looking at manufacturing sector, it can be categorized into 40 industries according to iStan's categorization. And these 40 industries have been classified into 4 industry groups based on their level of technology. As you can see in the table, it is high technology, mid to high technology, mid to low technology, and low technology. The industries have been categorized based on their level of technology. iStance and HS codes have been interlinked for this analysis. And for the main characteristics for exports, the 10 main export industries, they take up about 98% of the total exports. In particular, prior to the sanctions, clothing, steel, food, and beverages, ferrous metals were the top 4 exported products, and they comprised an overwhelming portion. And even before the sanctions, there was a tendency of exports being concentrated in low-level technology industries. So the yellow line is the low-level technology items, and we can see a continuous increase of the low-level technology products. It's beverages and food, so this is the impact of these industries' exports increasing. And it has not been stated here, but mining and the low-level technology were the main export items, which is a negative aspect. And since the strengthening of sanctions, we are seeing changes to export trends. It is probably because since the sanctions, there have been bans on the exporting of these 4 major export industries. This is the 2019 top 10 export items. And we can see the export trends from 2010, 13, 19, 16, and 19. And it shows that because there have been bans to their main exported industries, other industries have been taking up in more portions. But such increases in other industries could not take the place of their previous exports. So overall, compared to 2016, the amount of exports in manufacturing has been greatly reduced. This also shows trends in 2010, 13, 16, and 19. So the gray shaded portions are the common industries in 2010, 13, and 16, but they have been excluded in 2019, and we are seeing new types of goods, but there are limitations to this. And next on the imports, unlike exports, It is based on the BEC categorization on the usage. So the main features of the current state of import per use is shown here. Compared to the 2000s, the amount of capital goods imported increased. It shows the strengthening of industrial production capacity. And on the import of intermediate and consumer goods, it increased considerably. So it shows that industrial production and consumption levels have increased. Another characteristic is that unlike capital goods, even after the sanctions, the intermediate goods have continuously been imported, but this has led to a greatening in the trade deficit. And looking at the recent trends since the closing down of borders, intermediate goods and consumer goods imports have gone down dramatically. It's the lines in yellow and green. Going into detail, starting with the capital goods, based on HS codes, we can look at what are the biggest imported capital goods. And the first one is motor vehicles for transport of goods. And we can see that motor vehicles for transport of passengers and for increased transportation capacity can be shown through this, and it shows that the transportation capacity has increased. And another area that imports have increased is communication devices, and about 80% of it is cell phones. So cell phones are considered as capital goods in this categorization. And 5.7 million mobile phones have been estimated to have been imported in DPRK, and this probably facilitated economic activity in DPRK. And another item is automatic data processing machines. So basically, it's computers. Other than this, what is important for industry is the import of machinery. And I utilize the MTI classification. This is a system used for classifying industrial goods, and it's used by the Ministry of Industry. As you can see in the graph below, the blue is the big categorization, and the red shows the machineries. So there are pumps and transport machinery, the primary industrial machineries, and there are precision machines, but it's almost not being imported. And transportation has been excluded from the mobility machinery. And to explain this graph, when looking at the industry classification, we see there is active import of construction and mining machinery, in particular in the early 2010s. In the early 2010s, DPRK was interested in construction and mining. For manufacturing, there has been an increase in the exports of textile, clothing, metals, food processing, and chemicals. And I think an important point is textile, clothing, and food processing. It is light industry, and the machinery price is low. And we can see a big portion of import in the light industry compared to the heavy industries. It shows that DPRK is stressing and emphasizing light industry. But the problem is that mining and construction was an area where they imported machinery most. So the recovery in manufacturing seems to have not picked up. And since the sanctions, it has gone down greatly. In the short term, I don't think there will be serious impacts at the moment because they have already made imports of machinery in the 2000s. However, they will feel the impact once the components start to break down because they cannot import the components. For the intermediate goods, it includes the commodities because it's pretty similar. For industrial materials, it comprised the largest portion, as you can see in the graph. Since the sanctions, still the industrial materials are being imported similar to previous average levels, and there is a reduction in decline in fuel imports. And fuel parts and food and beverages, the imports for industrial use has been continuing. Going on to the materials, I took out fabrics and textiles because they take up such a big portion. And fabrics and textiles was excluded from this discussion. And if these two are excluded, as you can see in this table, the import of plastic was the biggest, and even since the sanctions, the imports of plastics has increased. And looking into the details, the plastics, it's not about manufacturing, but it's mostly for construction, such as the coverings for the walls and the floors and floor materials. Next, I want to talk about steel and steel products. We see a lot of import of steel and steel products. As you know, DPRK exports iron ore and they import some steel products. They export low quality steel, and high processed steel is being imported back into the DPRK. So DPRK does produce steel, and they cannot import steel due to the sanction, and there will be a lack and a shortage of a highly processed steel, and this will have an impact to their machineries. For the parts, intermediate goods, I want to skip this part. And I told you about the reduction in fuel imports. That is because, as you can see from this table, the amount of fuel that has been imported, it's not changed, but the oil import amount in terms of price that has gone down, and that is because the amount of fuel has gone down due to global price reductions. So it is not about actual quantity reduction. On the consumer goods, I have not done enough analysis, so I have not included in my presentation, but some major features is that for durable consumer goods and semi-durable consumer goods, non-durable consumer goods have all rapidly increased. And since the sanction, it has been reduced greatly, which might have had an impact on the consumption of ordinary citizens. And on the outlook of North Korean trade, briefly, North Korea has to develop new products quickly, or else their export amount will go down even after sanctions have been lifted. That is because exports are concentrated on coal and clothing. As DPRK's GDP goes up, they cannot have a comparative advantage in the apparels industry, so they cannot just rely on this industry. Also, DPRKs and recite export from 2011 to 2016 was 1.2 to 1.4 trillion. And in 2020, it was only 660 million. So even if the sanctions are lifted, I don't think they can resume to the export levels that anthracite enjoyed in the past. They have to quickly find new items to export. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Hong. So the sanctions started and were strengthened in the second half of Kim Jong Un's regime, and there was the COVID situation, which had a big impact on their DPRK exports, but imports has been maintained to a certain extent in order to run the DPRK economy. And he talked about the import items, that it's mostly on construction and communication and mining. And he talked about the main items. He also talked about light industry and machineries used in the light industries being imported to improve the livelihood of the DPRK people. And DPRK cannot export certain items. Therefore, they're trying to focus on other export items such as precision machinery. And they will have to develop strategic export items, or else their trade deficit will grow. That was pointed out by Dr. Hong, and we hope that we can have a lively discussion based on this. Next, Dr. Jung, you have 20 minutes for your presentation.
Good afternoon. My name is Jung Eun-mi from KINU. The title of my presentation is Assessing 10 Years of the Kim Jong Un Regime, the Social Policies of the Regime. So this is a research that I am conducting within KINU because I wanted to find out about the social and economic sectors and assess those sectors. So this is a KINU project that we are conducting. Our moderator, Professor Kim Jong-un, said that 10 years ago when Kim seized power, not many people actually predicted that the regime would last so long in a stable manner. Then, how was this possible? So my study hypothesis was this. What about the social policies of the Kim Jong Un regime? By making much investment into the social policies, I think Kim Jong Un was able to maintain its regime and sustain its regime. That was the hypothesis of my paper. And this study was conducted to provide the evidence behind that. Then why do social policies matter? Because social policies are an indicator of social stability and social unity. So it's to help members of a society protect themselves from social threats such as poverty, natural disasters, and diseases. And at the end of the day, it's to resolve conflicts within society and pursue the stability and unity of society. That's why social policies are important. Next, social policies also matter because it shows how much the regime will be sustainable in the long run. So we can actually use this as an indicator of the prospect for sustainable development and resilience of the regime. Recently, energy, health crisis, and food shortage rose due to the pandemic. So how is the regime faring against such threats? It is important that we assess how resilient the regime is to assess how well it is doing. So I think these are some of the characteristics of the social policies under Kim Jong Un. It adopts a two-pronged strategy of inclusiveness and control. So Kim Jong Un has the motto of people first principle. It's a populist ideology pursued by the chairman. But on the other half, Kim Jong Un makes sure that no one leaves the regime. And we see this control over erratic behaviors such as anti-socialist. So we can see this two-track approach that Kim Jong-un is taking. They do not use the term social, they use 인민시책, which means people's policy, or 사회문화시책, which stands for socio-cultural policy. And if we deep dive into the policies of Kim Jong-un, we can find out that it's about universal coverage, but in reality, service is offered in a selective manner because of the scarce resources. And with denationalization of welfare, the social policies is shifting gears. For instance, for healthcare, that would be free, but drugs should be paid by individuals. Treatment is free, but individuals have to pay for their drugs or other facilities and so forth. Now, I'm sure that you've seen these terms. 사회문화시책, which stands for Socio-Cultural Policy. This is the definition. State policies implemented to fulfill the cultural needs of the people by developing the areas of education, culture, and health. And this is used to promote the status of the regime. They talk about free education, free treatment, paid leave, policy of rest and vacation paid for by the state, and childcare centers and kindergartens operated and funded by the state. And these types of services fall under the socio-cultural policy. Social security system refers to the system in which the state provides for the lives of the people who have lost the ability to work due to old age or disability. And social insurance is a state policy that supports individuals and their family members when they lose their ability to work. And because North Korea is an authoritarian regime, we cannot just understand their social policies from the social perspective. What I mean by that is that it involves control to some degree. That is my research framework. So the purpose of Kim Jong-un regime is to establish socialist lifestyles and law-abiding culture. And recently, the regime is carrying out campaign to eradicate anti-socialist and non-socialist behavior and politics by selecting a number of powerful families. At the same time, it is aiming to eliminate the trends of prioritizing groups' needs over national needs. So these are some of the trends that are witnessed in DPRK. Now let us look at the social policies by timeline. As you know, the early stages of the regime was all about military first policy, which worsened the lives of the people. and their lifestyle changed dramatically. So with Kim Jong Un taking power, there was this transition from the military first policy to people first policy, and I'm sure that you still remember his famous speech before the army that he will make sure that no people is hungry or suffers from hunger. But then 10 years now, we still see hunger pervasive in the regime. However, in the first 3 years, Kim Jong Un spent the largest money in social policies, including education. So education recorded the highest annual increase. So this is the early stages of the regime, and with the series of these policies, the regime stabilized despite the concerns of the outside. Kim Jong Un became confident of his policies, and at the 7th Congress of the WPK, which was held in a few decades, he announced the goal of constructing a strong civilized socialist state. He proclaimed his vision. And if we drill down in the social policies, he talked about education reform, that he will make education mandatory, that he will provide the right conditions for the teachers so that they can increase their qualifications. And at the same time, there was modernization of health and a construction of a nation that is a sports powerhouse. Now, the regime spent a huge budget in healthcare. And this was very closely related to the reproduction of the population. So for Kim Jong Un to stay in power for the long run, he has to make sure that he has the human resources that can help him stay in power and construct a strong nation and economy. But as we know, the Hanoi summit collapsed and the mood changed. Now North Korea again shifted to a confrontational state. And there was the 8th Party Congress this January. And some of the social policies were discussed during the Congress. And I have listed some of the agenda. They focus on the people policy. They talk about constructing 50,000 houses in Pyongyang and 25 housing units in Gyeongdeok district. And the chairman also talked about the gap between urban and rural areas. And this was officially admitted at the 8th Party Congress. So they said that they will reduce the statewide discrepancy also in education and health. Now, recently, the youth has emerged as another challenge to North Korea, because the youth generation is key to North Korea's future, so it has topped the agenda of the social policies of DPRK. So their goal is to mobilize human resources, which will be led by the young minds. And from this February, there has been progress and follow-up to the 7th Congress of the WPK. And the goal was to build a strong powerhouse by 2035. And this was a letter sent to the youth organization. And it consists of many 5-year plans to take a leap forward every 5 years. So that was the methodology that Kim Jong Un plans to adopt. Then how will the chairman achieve his goal? If we look at the details, he talks about the spirit of the age of Tolima, the mythical horse. He travels back to the 1960s when human resources were mobilized to revive the economy. And this was presented by the chairman. So will this 2035 vision become a reality? We can't be sure. Now, for the past 10 years, Kim Jong Un regime has invested much to the social policies. Then how did the policies change the lives of the people? So we can take a hint at the lives of the people by reading the VNR of the 2030 Agenda implementation. This report presents various indicators, and we can learn which indicators made improvements and which ones deteriorated. And I'm sure that the report will give us useful implications. Since this has been disclosed, I think you can just read it on yourself. But the focus of VNR is that it seems like there's been slight improvement in the livelihoods of the people, but the regime still suffers from food scarcity, and the report only reflects up to 2019. And the international community wants to know what happened in DPRK last year, so 2020, but the report does not contain any details about 2020. So if we go to the summary, the social policies rely on self-reliance. And I said that North Korea will take a dual approach of inclusion and control. And it seems like North Korea is taking the control road. So it's placing more weight on control, because North Korea has revealed vulnerabilities of its regime, such as it has admitted food scarcity and climate crisis, and they have been mobilizing women in different areas of industrialization and so forth. So over the past 1 to 2 years, in health, food, energy, and so forth, North Korea became much more vulnerable. And we can take a hint of the reality by reading the VNR. But now the economy is unstable, and their economic growth has been dampened. That means that social risks will go up, and the society will become more rigid. So at the end of the day, it will create a vicious cycle. And the conventional security involves nuclear threat. And since everything is intertwined, and on top of that, since the regime fights COVID-19 and the economy shut down its borders, it's not easy to find a breakthrough. But still, given the circumstances, we still have to find a way out for North Korea. So the pressing task cannot be addressed with one single country alone, which is why such task requires multilateral efforts. Because North Korea has limitations in dealing with and combating the crisis ahead of the regime. This is why we need to ponder on how we can cooperate to help DPRK. But the legitimacy as well as the sovereignty and the inter-Korean matters are some of the agenda that cannot be addressed easily. And North Korea is not being flexible with its approach to those matters, which is why we have to wait for North Korea to send very consistent signals. Thank you very much. Yes, thank you very much. Well, you talked about how North Korea lacks resources, and which is why the North Korean regime provides selective services to its people so that it can stabilize its social policies and thereby its society. You made an assessment of North Korea's social policies and briefly talked about VNR for SDG implementation. Now, we heard two presentations, and as I mentioned, we have three discussants. We have with us Dr. Choi Jang-ho, Dr. Kim Il-han, and we also have with us a research fellow, Mimura Mitsuhiro-san. So this, I will first ask Mr. Choi Jang-ho to speak. So Dr. Choi is a research fellow at KGFP. He studied at SNU and he received his doctorate at Oregon State University in the US. And he researches trade to North Korea in depth, and he conducts research in the regime shift and transition in states that were formerly socialist countries. And he wants to learn from those regimes and cases to apply that to the case of North Korea. He studies the economy of North Korea and the integrated model between the two Koreas and the accession to international bodies of North Korea. So I will give each of the discussants 7 to 8 minutes. First, Dr. Choi.
Hello, everyone. I am Chang-ho Choi from Kiev and I want to talk about Dr. Hong's presentation. And Dr. Hong provided analysis of DPRK's economy based on data and looked at the changes and trends in the DPRK's import and exports. So there was a trade analysis and import and export analysis in order to review the trade situation of DPRK in his presentation. However, the title was the foreign sector of North Korea, but according to your presentation, it was mostly about trade and not on the external economy. And the overarching analysis, I know that you include travel and transboundary economic activity, but today's presentation seemed to be focused more on trade. And personally, what I had expected from Dr. Hong's presentation was differences in the characteristics of DPRK's trade by time. So he took the regime in 2011, trade increased, and then in 2014, with the slowing down of the Chinese economy, commodity prices went down, and China focused on environment, and that's why they started to regulate anthracite imports, because anthracite leads to a lot of particle matters, and that is why they limited anthracite imports. And then there was the nuclear testing in DPRK, which led to a strengthening of sanctions against DPRK in 2018. And then there was the COVID-19 situation, which led to blockages of its borders. So, by these different times, I think there are different characteristics of trade and trade policy. So, it was analyzed as a whole as Kim Jong Un regime 10 years, but maybe if you could analyze it by different phases of the Kim Jong Un regime, I believe that the results of the analysis will be more abundant. So these 4 milestones, I believe, led to structural changes to trade in DPRK, because DPRK's trade, they try to pursue self-reliance. They are operating their import and import to preserve their economy, and to analyze their import and exports, you will have to look at the structure that impacts their system. And some factors are the taking of the Kim Jong Un regime, and slowing down of the Chinese economy, strengthening of the sanction, and COVID-19. For example, as soon as Kim Jong Un took the office, they realized trade liberalization and decentralization, and with the slowing down of China's economy, Kim Jong Un increased their apparel exports, and the anthracite exports had gone down, and food and intermediary imports increased. It was not shown in your analysis, but since the trade stoppage in 2010 and Kaesong Industrial Complex being shut down in 2016 led to DPRK's reliance on China to increase. So such structural changes, if that is mentioned in your analysis, I believe it will be desirable. Due to the DPRK sanctions, the exports had gone down, but in 2018, when there was heightened sanctions compared to 2017, in 2018, the imports did decrease, but the drop was not that big. And in 2019, the imports had increased compared to 2018. So what is the meaning of this in the Kim Jong Un administration's or regime's import policy? Due to COVID-19, it's been almost 2 years. It's more than a year and a half since trade has stopped. And if trade is stopped for more than 2 years, if this is prolonged, how will this impact DPRK's economy and their trade policy? Also, you gave some prospects of trade being recovered and resumed, and I think that you are showing us directions on how their economy will improve. But in this current situation, the COVID quarantine situation, I think, is being highlighted more. Maybe that could have been a way for you to explain the situation. We are under COVID, we're in the midst of COVID, and there's the Delta variant, and the vaccination can prevent COVID, but the Delta variant is a new variable that might nullify the effects of the vaccination. Will North Korea and China relations lead to a resumption of their trade? And will the trade go towards levels before the sanctions or before COVID? And Kim Jong Un these days, in the overall economy, pursued liberalization and decentralization, but it seems that he has changed directions to more centralized control. And what implications will this have on trade? Lastly, on the sanctions against DPRK, will China comply with the sanctions? And does China, rather North Korea, have enough foreign capital, foreign reserves in order to overcome the situation? Dr. Hong, in his overall report, I think included these themes, but he was trying to make his presentation short, and because of this, he seems to have limited his presentation. I hope that my comments help in his research. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Che. You raised very interesting and important questions. You talked about the point that the presentation was focused on trade, yet the title was on foreign sector of North Korea. And one thing that stood out was tourism. So tourism is an important part. I don't know how much you can deal with this. With the Kim Jong Un regime taking office, the sanctions being remained, Kim Jong Un for the past 10 years has put in all of his chips onto travel and tourism. So the socialist economies, they tried to focus on tourism too. In 2019, when Kim Jong Un met with Xi Jinping, he said that he wanted to increase tourism. And if it wasn't for COVID-19, I think that DPRK's economy would have thrived with such an increase in tourism. And so his tourism policy was undermined the most due to COVID-19. And he talked about connecting trade with the overall external economy. And it's all connected. And also he mentioned that internal economic policies and structures have to be linked with the trade. And the COVID-19 quarantine situation, we don't know in detail, so I'm sure you cannot explain this in detail, but what will be the speed of this and how fast will DPRK and China resume their trade relations? So if Dr. Hong could answer later on, we will go on to Dr. Iran Kim.
So, Dr. Kim Il-han is a research fellow at Dongguk University, DMZ Peace Center. He received a PhD on North Korea and studies North Korea's economy and agriculture, and also conducts extensive research on DMZ area. And at the same time, he also studies the mechanism of North Korea and how to institutionalize what's happening in North Korea in terms of policies. Now the floor is yours, Dr. Kim. Please keep your discussion within 7 to 8 minutes. Hello, everyone. My name is Kim Il-han from Dongguk University. Thank you very much, Dr. Chung, for the insightful presentation. I know that it's not easy to give a summary and overview of a 10-year regime. So I'm sure that you worked very hard to put this together, and I will make sure to read the report later on. So you talk about the outcome of the 10 years of the Kim Jong Un regime. Let's say healthcare and education could serve as some of the indicators where we look at what changes have been brought about in the regime. Of course, there are other sectors as well, but I'm sure that healthcare and education are the two important sectors that we examine. So I would like to see more data or stats on those two sectors, and I'm sure that you have them with you. So this is what I would like to say today. After the 8th Congress, now North Korea focuses on people first, people-centered policy, and populist idea. Then how are the two related? And after the 8th Congress, Dr. Chung described what's happening after the 8th Party Congress, that control is taking over inclusion. And how is that related to people first ideology of the regime? And I would like to see more discussions made on that front. One thing is certain, after the 8th Party Congress, North Korea seems to be reining in its control over its people. And everything seems to be centralized. By that I mean that all the different local authorities are now falling under one central authority. And then what is that one central authority? It is to maintain the central governance to carry out social policies, thereby expand government finance, thereby invest that money for its people. And at the end of the day, the regime wants to achieve its people first mission with that strategy. And during the 8th Party Congress, North Korea said that the spirit of the 8th Party Congress is to reshuffle and reorganize its cabinet. And I think that was quite significant in many ways. And I believe that what the chairman mentioned actually led to the centralization of power in the regime. Now, the officials that were shown in the 7th Congress and the people that were shown in the 8th Party Congress, as you know, the Congress underwent reshuffling of all of its cabinet members. And during the 7th Congress, there were some officials who were not even there, and they were not even candidates for the Congress, but they became the main cabinet members in the 8th Party. So that shows that North Korea went through reform of its cabinet. At the same time, the cabinet is taking more accountability. And the ministers, there are 25 minister-level officials in North Korea, and they became members or provisional members of the Party Congress of the WPK. That was not imaginable in the past. So it serves two functions. One is to control. The second is to empower the cabinet. So this shows the idea of centralization to help its people at the end of the chain. And I believe that the reform that we saw at the 8th Party Congress demonstrates that North Korea is willing to take that path. And during the 8th Party Congress, the leader took a photo of a statement. And the statement set forth a statement about resolving the food shortage. But then that problem was not resolved. And during the extended meeting under the 8th Party Congress, the leader harshly criticized the top officials, especially those in taking charge of the politics and the policies were demoted. That was an attack and criticism towards the top elites, because they were not able to address the food shortage in North Korea. And food shortage is one of the indicators that shows how well North Korea is faring. And housing is another element that the outside measures. Kim Jong Un's principle is people first, and under people first, food and housing seems to be the two pillars of his principle. Now, is this right or wrong, or is this legitimate or not? Well, that's not the end of the discussion. The fact that North Korea is taking specific action is something noteworthy, because we need to be able to assess what North Korea is doing to predict the future. Now, the key to social policies is a framework that can show the changes of the past and the changing policies within North Korea, the political events taking place in North Korea should be analyzed. And on that note, I would like you to identify what's happening in North Korea and enrich your literature and research. Thank you very much for the discussion. You pointed out a very important topic about control and inclusion that would be serving the people, how to strike the balance between control and inclusion, and what perspective do we need to take in analyzing the two. If North Korea was to continue with its two-track approach, then what can we do to analyze what's really happening inside DPRK? So thank you very much for your discussion. And I would say that North Korea suffers from shortage of human resources. So the regime is very ambitious, but it does not have the right level of human resources to follow that through. Next, we have with us Mimura Mitsuro-san. Dr. Mimura is a senior research fellow at the Economic Research Institute for Northeast Asia. He also visited North Korea roughly 40 times, and he focuses on inter-Korean relations and Northeast Asian economy cooperation. So I think he's an expert in this field, in the integration in Northeast Asia. So he's very much interested in this topic. So not only Korea, but also China, Russia, and the US, and the EU and Japan. So he supports colleagues with co-research in those countries. So you have about less than 10 minutes.
예, 안녕하십니까.
Hello, I am Imura from Arena. Thank you for the wonderful presentations and also interesting discussions. For each of the presentations, I would like to make some comments, short comments, and ask some questions. If it weren't for COVID-19, I would be there in person for the discussion, and I would be able to have exchanges with the presenter and the other discussants, but it's quite unfortunate that we are living amidst COVID and cannot meet one another. Dr. Hong presented on the economy, and I want to make some short comments and ask some simple questions. Dr. Hong provided a detailed presentation, and he made many comments and analysis that were very well grounded. Because you were trying to base your presentation on a lot of data, it seemed that the presentation was two-dimensional. To understand the DPRK's economy, we need to study two-dimensional statistics, but we need to have a 3D picture to have a fuller understanding of the DPRK situation. And I have visited North Korea, and even if you visit North Korea, you can't get a lot of information because it's all censored and they don't show you books that you want to read, and you're stressed out, and therefore you go out for beer and you talk to people over beer, and that's why you don't remember a lot from such conversations, but still you can get a better understanding of DPRK. And you talked about intermediary goods, and I think you were able to categorize them well based on their technology levels. Looking at DPRK's trade structure, especially after 2018, there is a sudden increase in certain items. So I want to ask you about that. The reason behind the hike in the exports of certain items. And then there was increase in the wheat imports from 2018. And some may think that this is because of processing. And we need to review this too. DPRK, internally they produce a lot of processed foods such as instant noodles and bread. And in order to produce instant noodles, you need wheat and palm oil. And you need salt and sugar. So you need to import such raw materials. So if we could have more detailed information of what is being imported into DPRK and the trends in those figures, you can get an answer. And for automobiles, buses, and trucks are being imported. If there is a lot of import of buses, it shows that transportation is increasing, especially in Pyongyang. Next to the exhibition hall, you will find more buses parked in the parking lot. When I was in 2000, when I went to DPRK Pyongyang in 2018-19, I saw many buses, and when I went to Wonsan and Haeju, I could see a lot of buses. So unlike the past, I could feel the change firsthand. So the trade figures, and if you compare that with the reality, you can get a sense of social change and social economic change. So if you could connect those two, in your presentation, we could get a more three-dimensional picture of the DPRK's economy. And for the exports, you said that the quality of their exports is becoming even more aggravated. There could be external factors, internal factors, and international factors leading to a reduction in the quality of DPRK's exports. If you look at the impact of South Korea, there's the May 24th situation and the Kaesong complex being shut down, which has led to a reduction in processing and manufacturing. And another doctor talked about China's situation, China's economy slowing down. So Dr. Cho talked about this too, and I felt that you put in a lot of time in your research looking at the details. So I commend you for your great work, and I asked you those questions based on that. Next, on to Dr. Eun-mi Jung.
Thank you very much for the well-made analysis on North Korea. So you analyzed from 2012 to the 7th Congress, which focused on increasing social welfare and about increasing the level of control. And after the 7th Congress of the WPK, the regime started to focus on modernization of healthcare and education reform and providing free education to its people. And Dr. John, you talk about anti-socialist and non-socialist, and how do those two terms differ? I'm sure that this is a topic that you are very interested in. And how is North Korea increasing its level of control over its people? Because anti-socialist and non-socialist can be different. So it really depends on the definition. And I am very much interested in what North Korea is doing. And it feels like North Korea is moving towards an authoritarian regime. That is my hypothesis. You talk about inclusion and control, but back in 1971, when Saemaul movement started, the government controlled the people so that they could develop their neighborhoods. And I believe that we can find some similarities between what North Korea is doing in terms of its rule, development, and the Saemaul Un동 in Korea. And number 3 is my last question. North Korea has closed its borders, and from 2016 it is under economic sanctions by the UN. So even if North Korea was to increase its economic and management sovereignty, it will not be able to export its goods. It cannot even receive payment. And because that does not affect their production, North Korea is focusing on self-reliance. Instead of importing goods from China, North Korea is attempting to invest in research and development. And the regime is providing incentives to those who offer great R&D ideas, which shows that the regime focuses on collective work. And now, under their constitution, they have removed communist and they only use socialist. But under COVID-19, when the borders are locked down and when the economic sanctions remain, I believe that we are seeing a distinct trend in the policies that North Korea is taking between socialism and communism. So I would like to know the take of Dr. Chung. Thank you very much for that comment. Yes, please, Dr. Chung, can you tell us about non-socialist and anti-socialist and also the ideas between control and inclusion, and also about communism and socialism? Because now communism may not be fitting given what's happening in North Korea. Back in 2018, during the inter-Korean exchanges, there were many episodes at the time. And Chairman Kim said that he liked Korean songs, so he actually sang a Korean song. But now, recently, he has expressed his hatred towards the Korean wave. Now, back in 2018, I'm sure that the chairman had prepared for the Inter-Korean Summit by learning about Hallyu, the Korean wave, but the way he's reacting now poses many questions about whether that was true or not. We'll give you 3 to 4 minutes to make your answers.
Dr. Imura and Dr. Che, thank you for your discussions and your comments. So you pointed out the areas that I need to fill in, and it will help me in supplementing my research. Due to time limitation, I will answer briefly. I think it would be appropriate to change the title to trade. And in the report itself, I do not deal with investment and tourism and only on trade. So I will change the title. I think it will be clear. And on the characteristics of different phases, I touched upon it very briefly during the trends. And in my actual report, I don't think I deal with the phases, different phases, up till 2013 liberalization, and then after that, depression of trade, and then the Kaesong complex shutdown and trade with South Korea and so forth. I will be supplementing that in the report. And on the short-term forecast in the report, I have divided into short-term, mid to long-term, and long-term. And I did not write the short-term prospects because there are so many variables right now. So the short-term, the prospects that will have to come later on. And in the short-term prospects, I will put in expectations on the resumption of trade and the foreign reserve situation of DPRK. That is something that could be considered and included, and I will include that in my short-term forecast. And Dr. Mimura talked about the analysis being a bit dry, and because of that, I do understand that it is not quite three-dimensional. And I may include some cases to give more color to the presentation. And I'll try to make it more three-dimensional in my final report. And after 2018, there are items in which the exports have increased. I don't think we can put a lot of meaning to it. The items where they have most export, it's only 50 million USD, and it's just processing. It is higher technology. It is included in high technology industry, but the technology used to produce the parts that DPRK is producing does not require high level of technology, therefore it is not that significant. And on the food, I did not deal with it in detail, but this is covered in the level of living in North Korea, and it deals with wheat, and there was a rapid increase in the import of wheat from the 2010s, and oil, there was an increase in such imports. This probably led to more consumption of bread due to the border shutdown. These days, the mid-level people in DPRK might not be able to enjoy the foods that they did in the past due to the stopping into imports. I'll try to develop my paper even further. Thank you for the discussion.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jung. Yes, thank you very much for the discussion. It was a great opportunity to learn from your inputs, and it will help me improve my research. So thank you very much for your insightful ideas and suggestions. Now, when it comes to social policies, it falls under society, and we need a macro tool which can be politics, of course. And what Kim Jong Un is pursuing, his political stance or path, and how we can connect that to social policies. I think you gave me great ideas about how I can connect the two in the larger context. So thank you very much for that input. And Dr. Mimura, you asked questions about anti and non-socialist, and I met many defectors this year. What's the difference between the two? So anti-socialist is to pursue and seek capitalism, and to seek the illegal distribution of, for instance, K-wave materials, and also to respect the Chinese regime. That falls under anti-socialist. Now, non-socialist is very closely related to corruption in the everyday life of the residents. That was the explanation that I was given. But one interesting thing is the Workers' Party, I think it was December 2018, that released an article from a police officer in North Korea, which was about improving the life of the residents, and it talks about the consumption behaviors of the North Korean people that goes against the socialist ideology. Now, it talks about the import disease that can happen as a result of relying on foreign culture, and that will harm self-reliance that is pursued by the North Korean regime. That was the conclusion of the article. And that was quite interesting to see that how a cultural trend can be seen as something to harm the economic growth of the regime. That was an interesting article to read. And Dr. Mimura and Dr. Kim talked about control. And the reason why the level of control is increasing is, of course, because of the social circumstances in North Korea. But at the end of the day, given the limitations of the regime, be it maintaining its regime or developing its regime or maintaining status quo, the regime must improve the efficiency of its policies, and that leads to the centralization of power. All the policies have to converge in one point. And to improve the welfare of the people, the social policies should be developed, and that would be the ideal conclusion. But we will have to wait and see for whether that happens or not in reality. Thank you very much for your comments, and I will make sure to enrich my research based on your inputs. Thank you very much, Dr. Hong, Dr. Chung, for your presentations. You talked about the policies in Kim Jong Un regime, the economy and society, and you gave us a good overview of the status of the regime. And thank you very much, Dr. Choi, Dr. Kim, and Dr. Mimura for the discussion. We talked about North Korea's economy and society, but if you go one step further, that will open a full range of new discussion topics, but we wanted to talk in depth, which is why we focused on economy and society. But then we could maybe enlarge the scope and talk about how the control at the government level and the control at the individual level or private level are changing in the North Korean society, and how people are accumulating wealth and how that is leading to wealth gap between the people, and how is the COVID-19 situation in Korea evolving within the regime, and what about K-wave? That is an important factor that influences North Korean regime. So maybe we could connect all of that and lay out the next 5 years or 10 years of the North Korean regime. Thank you very much for your presentations. Thank you, Dr. Hong and Dr. Chung, for the presentations, and thank you very much, Dr. Mimura, for joining us from Japan. Well, KINU would like to thank you because you helped KINU so much in cooperating with North Korea. And thank you very much, Dr. Choi, for joining us virtually. With that, I would like to wrap up session 6-1 titled Evaluation of 10 Years of the Kim Jong Un Regime, Economy and Society. Thank you very much.